Okay, so what I have here is one of these CGA, EGA component to VGA converters, and yeah, there seems to be a lot of controversy when it comes to setting these up properly, getting the correct settings and making it work properly and everything. So I figured it'd be a good video to use as a reference for people trying to get these things set up with a VGA monitor. So most of these now, they used to come with the standard RGB ground and sync connector, but a lot of them now come with this connector here, because let's say you're using this for a Pac-Man or a Burger Time or some early game that used horizontal and vertical sync separate signals. That's where this comes in. You got red, green, blue and ground, and then you have a gray wire and a yellow wire. One is positive sync, one is negative sync. So you want to use this type of connection for the old Pac-Man games, or any game really that uses the separate sync signals. You would use this connector. But in theory, if you're just using RGB ground and sync for composite sync for any standard regular JAMA game, you'd use this connector. But these things don't come with this connector anymore. They only come with this one. So for a standard regular JAMA game, you do not use the yellow wire at all. You plug this connector into here, and you want to use the red, green, blue, and then the black wire is your ground, and you want to use the gray wire for your sync. The yellow wire is not used at all on a standard composite sync JAMA game. The yellow wire is not used at all. You can cut it off, throw it away, do whatever you want. But if you're using this on a game that uses separate sync signals, you'd want to use the yellow and the gray. But for this video, we're only going to discuss the standard JAMA setup here. So you can do what I do, you can not do what I do, but I'm going to take a pair of cutters here and just get rid of this yellow wire altogether, because we don't even need it. And I have the wiring here set up ready for testing. I have not actually turned this on yet. All the settings are default, and we'll be testing this fully here to show you how to set it up. But it also comes with a connector here for your power. You can use a barrel jack connector, or you can use this connector here that you can run to your power supply to supply your 5 volts. And this operates anywhere between 5 volts and 12. If we look here, 5 volts to 12 volts. Now I like to use, you can use 5 volts coming off of your power supply. You can use 12 volts, but I just used 5 volts in the past, and it's always worked just fine. But for this test here, we're going to use an actual barrel power supply here. I have an old Radio Shack 800 milliamp 6 volt power supply, and actually it's 7.2 volts, quite honestly. So I'm actually going to plug this in. Even though it says 6 volts, it's actually about 7.2. So I'm going to use it's a positive, center positive connector. Center is positive, the barrel outside is negative, so that's, make sure you don't hook it up backwards. You'll destroy your fuse and everything, and who knows what else could go wrong. But yeah, so we're going to plug it in. This is your VGA output. These are all your inputs, your regular RGB sync, sync, and HV, and I'll show that in a minute. And your component input, VGA pass through. This is your output. So we're going to hook up our VGA cable to the output, just like so. And we're going to hook up our connector to our RGBS HV. So when we power this up, I'll go through the inputs and I'll show you which ones you need to be set to for the right connections. I have a 19 inch. I have a 19 inch Lenovo 4x3 LCD here to the left. We're going to be using that for video purposes. But just for the general overview, yeah, for the JAMA games, you don't need the yellow sync wire at all. Use the gray one as your composite sync. But if you're using the older games that use separate sync, you want to use the yellow and the gray for horizontal and vertical separate sync. And you also want to choose this correct connection, because there's an option in the menu to choose this input, to choose this input, or to choose this input. So I'll go through that and show you which input to use for this connection, and which one is for this one and which one for that one. So if you have a component set up and you want to use this to convert to VGA, you can also do that via the component input. There's really not much else to go over before we turn it on. You have your menu buttons here for, let's zoom in, up, down, the action switch, and the menu. So if you turn this on and you got a jittery image or something isn't quite right, you can hit the auto button. It should auto adjust itself and get that to go away. But I also want to mention, I forgot till just now, that on the older games like Pac-Man and Burger Time and the other old Midway games like that, a lot of times you'll plug this in and you'll get sync problems, and it's not an actual connection problem, it's the fact that there needs to be an extra load on the sync circuit to get it to sync properly. So for instance, like let's say Pac-Man, you're trying to use this on a Pac-Man machine, you get your HV sync separate signals going into your wiring, and everything is great except the image is jumpy. The image is jumping around, and no amount of adjustments will make it not be jumpy. You get to take a resistor, 8K to 10K ohm resistor. This is just one that I have here in my barrel of stuff here. You can just take a regular old 8K to 10K ohm resistor and put it in line with the sync. So basically, if you imagine if we were to take our wire here that we cut, this is our sync wire, we would take our resistor and put it in series with the sync wire to add 8K to 10K ohm of resistance onto the sync wire, and that should fix the jumpy image. So if you have an older Midway game like Pac-Man and whatnot, and the image is jumping around, put your 8K ohm to 10K ohm resistor in line with the sync wire, and that should fix that problem, at least from my experience. Yeah, so I wanted to point that out. I don't have a way to show that on camera here for the video, but I wanted to put that out there in case you have that issue or run into that problem. Now we're also going to talk about the clamp settings, the proper clamp settings for medium res games. So I'll run this on a medium res game and a standard res game. So we'll do the standard res first, then we'll switch to medium, and I'll show you the clamp settings. I'll show you how to set up all your settings for your right positions and things like that for the frozen screen. I also do want to say that to avoid having to turn your brightness and contrast and saturation way up, these come by default with the RGB pots to about 50%. I don't know why you're not focusing there. There you go. So these RGB pots, but from default, are about 50%. So I like to turn these up to about 75%, because that will make you not have to turn up your settings quite as much. So we'll go to about 75 or so. These pots are hard to turn. There you go. 75 and roughly 75. Okay. So I like to put those pots to about 75%, which is, 3/4 of the way that way. So our initial setup is good. So now we're ready to turn on. This is the JAMA connector running to the JAMA harness. We got red, green, blue ground, and then sync just kind of placed in there for now with the supplied vendor cable, and our output to our monitor right here. So the next step is to get the monitor turned on, and then we can plug in our 7.2 volts or whatever it is off of our power supply, and then we will observe this red. My red keeps coming out of here. I need to do that. All right. Okay. So yeah, let's get the camera. I'll get a separate shot here. I'll leave the overhead on so we can see what buttons I'm hitting and what's going on. And then I'll have a separate camera facing the monitor so we can see what's going on and what I do with the buttons and how to get everything adjusted. And now that we have everything set up initially, then let's see if we can make it look good. Okay, well, the overhead light has to be turned off because it creates such a huge saturation and a huge overexposure issue when trying to use this cheap webcam that I have pointed here at the screen. But this should be okay the way we have it set. So everything is now ready to go. We've got our connection hooked up properly to our video connector here for our JAMA harness. We got good old Mortal Kombat on the tester rig ready for power up and testing. I have not turned this on yet, so we can share the knowledge together of whether or not we have a good one or a bad one. So, yeah, we're all ready to go, and I do want to point out that it's very important to select the correct input. You'll have this all hooked up, you turn it on, and it won't give you, it'll just say no signal. So you have to make sure you select the correct input. Under normal circumstances, you would use RGBS. There's 3 different inputs, RGBS, RGBHV, and then the component input, YPB, PR, I think it is. And then logically you would think that because we're using the connection that uses separate horizontal and vertical sync, that's the input you need to be on, but that's not correct. Because we're using the composite sync, This is all tied together. These inputs are tied together. The standard RGB sync and then the HV separate sync. It's all tied together. So because we're using the separate HV sync signal connector, but because we're using the composite sync signal, you want to select the RGB sync. And I'll show you that here in a minute. But I'll scroll through and show you, but it's important to select the correct input. We're using the RGB sync signals, but we're hooked up to the RGB HV input, so it gets confusing. So I want to make sure that I point out that you have to select the right input based off of your setup. So let's go ahead and plug this in, make sure it works. So I think we had, what, 7.2 volts this thing outputs, which should be right in the middle of what it needs. And sure enough, we get it to power on. And you see no signal. So let's go ahead and turn on, well, before we turn it on, let me make sure we're on the right input. So there's 4 switches here. We got up, down, menu, and SW. If we press the SW right here, you'll see that it goes to RGB HV. Now again, that's this input here that we're using. But because we're not using the separate sync signals, we're actually using a composite sync signal, you have to select, okay, YPBPR is the component. One more time, that should be our red, green, blue, and sync. Okay, so that's the input there that you want to use for when you're using this connection with the composite sync. That's the one you want to use, RGBS. So let's go ahead and turn on our test rig. 1, 2, 3. And we get an image, but it is frozen. And it is frozen because these 90s Midway games run at like 53.73 hertz refresh rate as opposed to 60 hertz. So because the refresh rate is 53 versus 60, this little converter board gets pretty confused. So the only way to fix that is to change the vertical position. So what I want to do is we want to hit the menu button, and we want to go down to geometry and select menu again. Go down to vertical position. These are the default settings. Hit menu again, and watch what happens. Watch, there you go, 28. Magically unfreezes. Let's hit that button. So again, if we go down to 27, it freezes on that screen. Nothing changes, nothing happens. If I go to 28, boom, magically comes back. Now, if we were to illustrate this even more, we'll start a game, and let's just do 1 player here. So let's bring this menu back up, geometry, vertical position. If I go 27, frozen, 28, unfreeze, 27, frozen, 28, unfreeze. So you have to maintain a vertical position of 28 or higher, and that's what I just leave it at 28 or higher on every game that you run this on. You don't got to worry about this problem anymore. So 28 is the setting for that. We'll hit menu again. We'll go to geometry, and you'll notice that the clamp settings here are 90 and 95. Now on standard res games, it does not matter. The clamp settings have no effect on standard res games. You can leave them default and have no issues. The only time you have to adjust these clamp settings is if you're running a medium res game, and I'll show that here in a moment. But the default settings are fairly good. Just putting that vertical position to 28 or higher is all you really need to do, and you can kind of just adjust everything else on the controls from your actual display. So if we hit the menu button here, you can see I can select brightness with this, and then we'll go to oh, wrong, I changed the input here, hang on. Somehow I hit the wrong button. There we go. Okay, now let's go back. Contrast, brightness, image position. If I select that, let's see, I want vertical position. We can select, see, I can select, move it down this way. There we go. Now if I do image setup, properties, which one of these was size? Image position, image, let's try setup. I don't know, either way, you can, that's outside the scope of this video, but you can see that we have a good size image. If we hit menu, we can actually go to geometry, and these settings will save in here. After you power cycle, there's NVRAM in this thing. All of your settings will save in between power cycles. So let's select geometry, let's go to vertical size, and you'll see it only stretches the bottom half. So we have to kind of find a happy medium. We can go like, we can stretch it beyond the bottom. Stretch it beyond the bottom and then go to up to vertical position. Now ideally, if you're dealing with any game other than Mortal Kombat, you could just raise your position up higher and have a full square image, but because it freezes, we have to stay at 28. So let's go down to vertical size and put it right about there. Okay, H size only stretches to the right, so then you come back to H position and move it to the left. I can't tell. Yep, right about there. Okay, so we're good on geometry now. Let's go to display and let's go to 1024 by 768. That's where it should be. Go back to return. Let's go to display. Oh, that's where I just was, sorry. Let's go to picture. And let's bring our brightness up a bit. That's looking good. And contrast. That's good. Duration and sharpness, we'll leave that. Looks pretty good right there. Bada bing. Perfect. So, yeah, that's the basic adjustments and how it works, and there's really not much to it. Just to make sure you have everything hooked up properly, make sure you're on the right input, go through and adjust your settings. If you're running in a midway board like this, you got to put vertical position to a setting above 28 or higher, and yeah, looks pretty darn good. So now let's turn this off and swap the board out with a medium res board. In this case, we'll do Cruisin' USA. And just to show you that everything stays, we'll disconnect that. And let's plug in Cruisin' USA. This may be a bit difficult here with how I have this set up, but we'll try and make it work. And the monitor went to sleep, that's fine. Okay, there we go. All right, let's plug this back in. Should bring the monitor back on. There it is. Now let's turn the test rig on as soon as this gets signs of life. There we go. And it's much bigger on the screen, as you see. It's cutting off the whole right side, but I'm not going to worry about trying to reposition the screen because we know how to do all that already. All we're worried about is doing these clamp settings. So what will happen with the medium res games over time? The medium res games will look okay when you first turn it on, but after 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes, it'll start getting more pink and more pink and more pink and more washed out and more washed out. See, look how you can see the outline is purple, the background is purple. It's just a bit. So if we actually go to picture, no, not picture. Let's go to geometry. Now look at how that looks. That's not very good. So if we select our clamp settings here and go to 03 and 04, magically, look at that, perfect. I go to 3, back to 4. Now the colors are fantastic. Look at how perfect that is now. Let's go. Oh, sorry. Let's move out of here and go to return, exit. That is glorious. There's no more purple outline. The background is black. Fantastic. So for the medium res games, you want to keep your clamp settings at 03 and 04. They have absolutely no bearing at all on this. so much better. They have no bearing at all on the standard res games. You want to keep your clamp settings at 03 and 04 respectively for the medium res games, and that will make them look fantastic. I mean, that looks awesome the way that it is right there. I wish you could see it in person. It's awesome. So yeah, I mean, that's about it. There's really not much else to say. We've discussed what inputs to use, how to wire it up. If you have the older Pac-Man games, how to fix the jumpy image with the resistor in circuit or in line with the sync wire. If you don't have an 8K to 10 kilo ohm resistor, you can actually plug, if you have a whole nother VGA cable, you can take the extra VGA cable and just plug it into the output. It doesn't need to hook to anything. Just take a regular VGA cable, plug one into here, leave the other end open, and that'll, just the act of doing that will add the necessary resistance onto the sync circuit, and it'll provide the same function as that 8K to 10K ohm resistor. But that's about it. Yep. How to set it up, how to work through the menu, and if you do turn it on, and it's kind of wonky, you can hit the auto button right here. You can hit the auto button, and it'll see the top of the screen's wigging out, and then it settles back in and kind of locks it back on. So if you're having sync problems or a wavy image or some kind of weird stuff going on, you can hit the auto button, and that should sync that up. If it doesn't, then you need to start troubleshooting. Maybe you don't have the sync hooked up properly or things like that. But I think we've got everything covered now. Just a quick and easy video showing how to set this up and how to operate it and how it works and how to navigate the menu, what to put your settings at, all that jazz. So yeah, if you have further questions, post down below in the comments. But otherwise, yeah, hopefully it helps you out, and hopefully it clears up a lot of confusion on how these boards operate. When set up properly and hooked up correctly and used properly, they work pretty well, pretty darn well if you ask me. So anyway, thanks for watching. If you have questions, let me know. Like, share, and subscribe if you want. Appreciate it, and we'll see you next time.